All right, bueno, bueno. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome today to one of the creators with the best taste and vision for the music industry and all kinds of cool art and all sorts of other entrepreneurial endeavors, Mr. Sam Means. Welcome to Ideas from the Edge.
Wow, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Long time listener, first time caller.
Let's fucking go, baby. Likewise. No, I was just saying this is way overdue, man. I've been a sort of admirer of your work from afar from a long time, which we'll start in a moment with Lightning Store and how cool all that is, and then obviously now with Wavlake, and I'm proud to be an investor there and a big fan of what you guys are pushing. So this is long overdue. So we're going to talk about a lot of stuff, but I want to start today with Lightning Store. I think very few people have good Bitcoin Lightning commerce experiences. Lightning Store was probably the first, and maybe still the only, which is potentially an issue. But also just has great taste. I remember when I went there, I was like, "Who is this actually good designer? Why are these shirts so cool?" So I'd love to hear the genesis story of that. How did you decide to start Lightning Store?
Yeah, I mean, most of the designs are so cool because I ripped them all off from Pumpkins. That's why they're so cool.
That is true.
Yeah, no, it was. I mean, it was very, very intentional. So yeah, I mean, I I've been interested in Bitcoin and Lightning and been trying to figure out how to be involved in it more. But I'm not a coder. I'm not a developer. I didn't really know what to do until I found out that you could stream money. And so then I started getting excited about the music stuff, because prior to that, what got me into it was like the e-commerce side of it, just because I'm dabble in that a bit as well and have for the last couple decades. So, it's kind of pretty early in the e-commerce world, and so it was incredibly difficult when I first started getting into that. And I've had various problems throughout the years with payment gateways and things like that. So got really into it through that. But then when I saw I had this potential other utility, I got really pumped on it. Unfortunately, there just weren't a lot of people. When I started searching for the music fans in the Bitcoin space, I was having a hard time finding anybody. Big shocker. Most of Bitcoin Twitter at the time was just talking about Bitcoin. Maybe they still are, to some extent. So
Maybe meat as well.
yeah, yeah, exactly. A few very niche things. One of them, music was a little hard to come by there. So instinctually, was like, I don't know what else to do. I'm just gonna make a crazy, I want to test this out. I've been messing with Lightning a bit, in the years leading up to that. I had set up a couple nodes and stuff, but I didn't know what. I'd set them up, but I'd never actually used them. I bought that first Casa node, and I was just like, I don't know, I'll put it on autopilot and just I'm helping. It's like that meme, the Simpsons meme. I'm helping, but I wasn't using it as a utility. So then I started getting serious, and I made a node. Kind of did the Raspberry Pi Umbrel thing that everybody was doing, and then connected it. Got it set up with the btcpayserver. And I was like, okay, well now I need a store, and also I want to find the music people. So the idea was just make sort of like the flashiest, craziest looking website you can make, just to try to walk in the room as a obnoxious peacock or something, and just have all this flair everywhere. But then make the Bitcoin merch. Yeah, it was pretty cheesy. It's like. I don't know. It was lots of orange, lots of giant Bitcoin logos. People don't necessarily want to be walking around with a giant Bitcoin logo on their shirt. So I sort of had this idea, if I create a hybrid of Bitcoin merch with the ideas around punk rock music and the DIY scene that I grew up in, which both, by the way, have a lot of similarities and parallels, and that's why I was so interested in it. So I just figured, if I find the people, if I put this stuff out here and anybody buys it, that it's not super obscure, but it's relatively obscure punk bands and stuff. And those people probably will be thinking like me, and so maybe that'll spark some conversations. And I don't know. I guess I just had a really, really good intuition there, because it did work. I just started finding, getting hooked up with people. People were like, "What is this? Who are you? And what is this?" Just oh, I'm nobody. I'm trying this out. It's like an experiment. But I started meeting people, and people like Elizabeth Stark. She was one of the first, and Des was at Lightning Labs still at the time, and they were just like, "This stuff is so cool. We love all these bands. Who are you?" how can we help, you know? And so yeah, they just started hooking me up with people that they had heard were sort of interested in some music stuff, and that led to conversations and just meeting people and kind of getting more involved in the space and just becoming yeah, just involved in a way that felt very natural to me. So instead of having to, yeah, I didn't, yeah, I was like sort of searching for a way that I could get involved without forcing it, you know. So it feels very nice how I sort of have walked into into this.
Yeah, no, it's sick, man. I mean, I think to this day, again, like it's so rare to find like any kind of good aesthetics or good taste in Bitcoin, and I hope that changes in this next cycle.
Yeah, I've seen. I mean, there's some other really cool, like No Good.
Oh yeah, no good
His
stuff.
stuff is super awesome,
Yeah.
and yeah, there's a guy Proof of Ink now who's
Oh,
does a lot of screen printing,
okay.
and he screen prints for a lot of other people and then sells their designs. So you're starting to see some more cool stuff, and
Sick.
yeah, so there's some real, and Satoshi symbol of Satoshi. That guy has always made some really cool stuff. So yeah, it's nice to see that, you know, I don't know, you just start getting involved, you start doing things, and that inspires people to do things, and then that inspires you to do more. And so it's just, that's how this works. That's if we're doing things right, I guess everyone sort of inspires everyone, and you just keep climbing up the ladder of I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm gonna give up. I'm gonna stop talking.
No, no, we eventually go mainstream.
Yeah.
You know, on the shirt game, you know, I haven't like sold these or anything, but my dad is a pretty like trippy psychedelic artist, and he also is now like very excited about Nostr, excited about
Oh wow.
those. And so I don't know if you've seen me. He's made some of my shirts, which are very wild. This is from his version of the Nostr.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty fucking trippy. He's out there.
I love that.
I need to find a way to get those out there for people.
Wait, so what is, I mean, if you don't mind, if I don't know if this is public, but like, what does he do? Like, is he just an illustrator? I mean, is he in the merch business somehow? Like what?
No,
Because that very much looks like a t-shirt design, you know, it's not just like a,
well, thank you. I hope we'll have video on this episode so people can actually see it. But it's a, in case you can't and you're listening, it's an ostrich in Japan, looking pretty like, I don't know, trippy psychedelic.
yeah, like an acid trip ostrich.
It's an
I've
acid
seen that.
trip.
I've seen that thing in my dreams.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully in a good way. But yeah, my dad is a very talented artist, and so all my life growing up, he makes everything, right. He's also very much in the DIY sort of punk ethos, I would say.
Cool.
And so he used to make like his trademark was, interestingly, we're in October now, but Halloween. And so around Halloween every year, where we grew up, where I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, he would basically make these giant, like 6 foot tall paper mache monsters and put them up in the yard. And then that would get a lot of, like we would have the local news and stuff come out and be like, who is this like crazy Halloween? And they started calling my parents the king and queen of Halloween. And
That's
so
amazing.
my dad then worked with my mom. She had you know, this I guess also sort of inspired me to work with entrepreneurs like you. She had a small ad agency. She was an entrepreneur. And with my dad, they also started an animation company. And so she would sell his animation. So he did long form, like old school Disney style, but very trippy animation.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so fun.
Yeah. No, he's a trip. And he'll be listening to this podcast. He's, I would say, number one fan, big Nostr bull. So that's
Cool.
Yeah,
Hi,
man.
Dad.
Yeah, exactly. What's up? On the subject, though, of the shirts themselves, I got to say, actually, let me see if I can grab one. One sec. It's kind of dirty. I go and I swim in the bay, and so I get really nasty.
Nice.
Put it out there to get
Yeah.
dry. Anyways, this is the NOFX shirt, the Nostr NOFX shirt.
Yeah.
In my mind, this is just like, this is not only like a good Bitcoin shirt, this is just a great shirt. Like, whenever I wear this out, everyone's like, oh, that's so cool, or that's so vibey, man. And they're like, what is this band? I'm like, well, there is a band, but this is actually an open protocol where you can have your own identity and share it freely with the world. But how did you specifically decide? Like, are you a NoFX fan? How did you decide to make this shirt? How do you decide your shirts you make in general?
Yeah, I mean, you know, these ideas just kind of, I don't know, they just come in my head. Yeah, I mean, I am a NoFX fan. Actually, they just played their last show
Oh, really?
a couple days ago. Yeah, in California.
Wow.
But they've been a band for 41 years, and I got to see them on this last tour,
Cool.
out in Brooklyn, which was really fun to see. But yeah, I'm just a fan. I mean, I grew up going to, you know, basement shows and punk shows and saw NoFX, you know, a lot of times. Most of these bands that I've that have, well, not most of them, but a lot of them. I mean, some of them are like one little generation before my time. Like I have an Op Ivy one. Never got to see Op Ivy. I still am hoping for that. Great Bay Area band for you. But yeah, they just like sort of, I don't know. It's pretty stupid actually. It's just like, I don't know, Nostr. It's this many letters. What band? Oh, NoFX. Kind of the same. I don't know. But yeah, people really like that one, and I'm psyched. I mean, NoFX is, yeah, they've been around a band for forever. Now they're not, but it is cool because it is one of those things. Like even if you're not a NoFX fan, you probably have seen that album cover, maybe. Like if you're sort of in the ballpark of independent music and stuff like that, especially in certain areas. Like if you're out in San Francisco, I would imagine, probably most people have come across a NoFX album cover at some point in time. So yeah, it is fun. I mean, it's really a cool conversation starter for most people. They're just like, what is that? Like,
Exactly.
I see that's a Misfit shirt, but why does it say Bitcoin? Or like, what? I see that's a minor threat shirt, but it says major threat. What does that mean? That's kind of scary. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
So it is kind of fun. I mean, it's a good way to sort of have to represent the things that you're into, without being just like, yeah, a giant orange Bitcoin logo, and also spark conversation, maybe a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The conversation starter is amazing. So while we're on the subject of your store and shirts, obviously we got to talk about the Jack shirt. There's I don't know if you foresaw this happening, that Jack Dorsey, for those of you who don't know, now only has one T-shirt, and it's Sam's, and it's a Nirvana shirt with Satoshi that got a lot, I guess, of fame this year when he was rocking it on the Super Bowl. What was that like? I mean, were you just like taken away? Did you sell like a million shirts after that?
I did sell a handful. Yeah, it was a little stressful because I mean, I actually have a dude, Chris, when I'm not in Arizona, he helps me pack the orders. But I was in town, and so I was getting ready to leave like the next week to come out to New York, and so I was very grateful, but also a little stressed because I had to suddenly print a bunch more orders and get them all packed up before I headed out to New York. But yeah, I mean, it was just like surreal. It's just kind of hilarious to see. You just start getting a bunch of text messages and Twitter DMs and telegrams and whatever, and just people like, you just see like Jack standing next to Jay-Z and Beyonce wearing your shirt. It's like, what fever dream am I in right now? No,
Yeah,
I did not see,
exactly.
because I wasn't why I was
Let's
one of
find
the,
out.
yeah, exactly. It's like one of the few people not watching the Super Bowl that night, so I just started getting messages. So yeah, it's pretty. I mean, yeah, it's awesome. It he's been very helpful in stress testing my node and BTC Payserver, and like it's pretty cool. Like it's actually pretty amazing. Like I said, I've been in e-commerce for a long time, and so to be able to scale, like to have something like that happen, and be able to have a node that's been around for, I've had this thing since it's probably been up for like 3 or 4 years now, I guess.
Yeah.
And it worked. Like it just worked for everybody. Like no one had any troubles. Like there's no customer support. It's pretty, just kind of like, wow, that was impressive. That like hats off to BTC Pay Server and my node and all the people channels with me, because that thing really like did great. Yeah, not a single transaction failed that I saw. So I mean, I'm sure there were some, but it's like nobody couldn't get it to work, which is pretty impressive and says a lot for really what that technology is, and the fact that I've never paid a single transaction fee to a bank, over the course of however long that's been up now, coming up on 4 years. It's kind of incredible when I've been paying a lot of transaction fees to banks for a long time in my other ventures. So
Yeah, no, it's sick. I mean, I think it shows you just like, we obviously have a long ways to go, but just how far we've come with Lightning Network. The fact that that works is a miracle.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, like I said, I kind of dabbled in it for a few years before trying to get it to work, and I've enabled Lightning on some other stores too, and people have used it over the years. But it is still hard. I mean, it's just crazy. Like I use Shopify for a lot of my other stuff in my other world, and yeah, everything just broke with that. So I'm kind of bummed. I have to figure out. I got to get with someone at BTC Pay and figure out when they're gonna update their Shopify stuff, because I had to disable that from there. But yeah, it is amazing that it's how well it works for how early it is.
Totally. And are you self-hosting that node, or do you run it in the cloud?
That one I run in the cloud. Yeah, I was self-hosting for a while. That did not pan out because it's like I didn't understand. I didn't know. I didn't know the work that it would take, and it just goes down too much. It's like too many things can happen.
Yeah.
So you get a little power surge, and all of a sudden, no one can buy a Nirvana shirt, and the
Yeah.
world's ending.
The world is ending, man. Like I can't imagine anything worse. So given given how impressive it is, and you say you're not whatever particularly technical or not a software engineer or whatever, but like I mean, this shit is not trivial, especially when you set this up 4 years ago. And also, I mean, you made it a point that you kind of grew up with the whole DIY punk ethos, like learn as you go, figure stuff out, which is what you like about Bitcoin. Something I like about Bitcoin. Like, have you just like, I mean, obviously, very, very cool guy, incredible shirts, been in a band, make your own music. We'll talk more about that later. But like, were you just like a closet nerd always? Like, were you always like also tinkering with Linux or something?
Not yeah. I mean, it was for me. It was websites. That was my first thing. So I had access to a computer in my house very early. My dad owned a business. He owned a pest control business, but was into computers and stuff. And so we had a computer. I had AOL, and all that stuff. And then I started. My brother-in-law is a professor at a college, and he came over one day and he was showing me sort of like sort of how the internet works and explaining everything to me. And I was like, what's happening? I was probably like 12, 12 or 13 or something. But once I realized that, I started understanding like what AOL was, but then that was sort of like this retail thing, but you could do these other things. Like you could make websites and do all these things that AOL was taking, kind of absorbing and then spitting back out through their interface. So then I got really interested in just making websites. And so I started teaching myself through just looking at the source code on other websites. Like, I realized if I could just take this block and I could put it over here and I could just trial and error some stuff, I could get the color to change, or I could get this image to show up instead, So when I was about 15, I guess, by the time I was 15, I'd gotten pretty good at HTML. That's where it stops for me, like all the stuff, the Lightning Store, I can do sort of like some front end stuff through the same exact method, which is basically just, I don't know, I'll just try it. I'll look at this and I can I can like sort of understand the logic. It makes sense to me. Like I can read it and it's like, oh, I get it. Like this does this. And so that makes sense. But yeah, I ended up making a website for the Weezer fan club. It was the first thing that I ever did that was, I guess, kind of in the music world and in the technology world, and that was really fun. And then I started really nerding out at that point, and I made like a message board, and I started selling email addresses to people, like all this other stuff.
Hacking out here and
Yeah, I was like just sort of like, I mean, it was easy though, because that was like 95, and so everything was just so simple, and everything, all websites were just so totally simple. there wasn't much to it, and I was just doing basic HTML. I wasn't doing anything. At that time, it was like Adobe Flash was starting to come into play, and there were people who could animate things, and I'm staying away from that. I'm just going to stick with images and text. It's more fun.
yeah.
But yeah, always a big nerd, and then then I started really getting serious about playing music and stuff. So then I would make the websites for my bands, and then because I could do that, because I figured out how to use graphic design software for website stuff, then I started making merch for the bands, and I just became that guy who sort of knew how to do all the things that you needed to do. So I've been doing that for 30 years now.
As an entrepreneur, which I love. Do the things that need to be done.
Yeah, I'm the guy that just I'm the responsible one, I guess.
Which interestingly, it's funny because it's like in the sort of, I guess, the punk rock or even the Nostr world, it's like you have all these beautiful like open source give back to the world, but you need people also to like make sure.
Yeah, you need people to know what they're doing for sure. And I'm so interested in it. I have sort of done a little bit of everything, kind of the jack of all trades, master of nothing, probably situation with me. But I just like knowing how these things work, even if I don't know how to do them completely. I just like understanding how they work, So especially in the music business, there's so many different elements, and you kind of have to know. I mean, that was, I didn't go to college. That was my education, was just working in
really?
music in various ways. I went to GCC. It was a little community college in Glendale, Arizona, but I was working like 80 hours a week at a music venue, and I had to quit eventually. I couldn't do it anymore. So I was just like, this is school actually for me. So I think
Way better than school.
I'm good. Yeah. Because this is what I want to do. So I'm learning so much here, and I'm not learning anything here. And I ran out of all my electives and guitar classes and music business classes I could take. So now I'm going to just go to real school. So yeah, I mean, that was, to me, it helps so much just in everything I do now. It's just having sort of had a hand in each little part of it, at least enough to understand like fundamentally how these things work. I think it's helped me kind of get to where I am now and work on the things we're trying to work on now too.
Yeah. So I definitely want to jump into the things you're working on now. But before we do, I mean, you mentioned obviously music. So you were both a fan and then a very serious. You made a lot of great music yourself. What where did that interest start for you? Like, were there certain bands? It sounds like Weezer. Was that your favorite band? Were you into certain genres? Were you going to shows, like sneaking out at like 12 to do this? Like, how did all
Yeah. I was super into the Beatles was the first thing that I got into. Like I'd go on these road trips with my dad, and shout out to my dad now. And he would just buy, like Beatles cassette tape. We would stop at the store before we would go to Oklahoma to visit his family, my family too, I guess, but his side of the family. And so every time we go a couple times a year, and then we would just load up on some tapes before we went, some new tapes. So after a few years, we had cycled through like the entire Beatles catalog and the Beach Boys and Bob Dylan and all that sort of stuff. So I got really super obsessed with like 60s and 70s pop music from that point. And Weezer's probably like the first band that I would say was like my band, because I had interactions with them as people, and so I had that connection there, which is really important. And I got to see a little taste of sort of how everything worked. I got to learn a lot from the early days of that through these two really cool people that were running that their official fan club at the time. And also Weezer just sort of, they were sort of like this sort of nerd alternative band that was happening simultaneously with like the grunge movement, so you have bands like Soundgarden and Nirvana, and these are all bands I love this sort of harder music. But then you had Weezer, who were sort of like the nerds, the slackers or whatever, and also they were making pop music. And so I really liked that hybrid that Weezer was, which was they're sort of existing in this alternative music world, but you can tell they're kind of dorks too, and that's exactly how I felt. So yeah, but the music was just, at the end of the day, it was like pure pop music. And then when I got a car, when I turned 16, that's when everything really changed for me. And also happens to be the year that Pinkerton came out, which was a Weezer album that to me just changed the course of my life, because it was just like, then I really saw like the path that bands go down. I saw massive success from nothing. Like in 1994, Weezer put out the Blue Album. Now 30 years ago, it's crazy. Right. And they just blew up. It's like Buddy Holly and the Sweater Song and Say It Ain't So. These huge singles. And then my favorite record from every band is always the second record, because after they're successful, because you don't know what to do. Like you just have this stress of like, what do we do? Like everyone wants us to sort of recreate the magic from the first thing. So you just end up with this really kind of weird album that most people don't like at first, but years later it becomes sort of like the most cherished record, which is what happened with Pinkerton. And then that year I got a car. So I went to just so many shows that year. And I started going to punk shows, and I started going to like pop punk shows too, like a lot of Fat Wreck stuff and Epitaph. That whole thing was happening too that exact same year. So you started seeing like Green Day and Rancid and NoFX and Bad Religion. Like in 1994, all those bands had The Offspring. They all had huge records. That was sort of the Green Day took off, and so everything sort of around that started propping up too. So I liked all that stuff because those were punk songs. They were fast, but then if you play them on an acoustic guitar, which I was playing because I was playing Beatles songs, you realize that they're just incredible songs. Like these are just pop songs played fast and loud. So yeah, that was the turning point for me. And I just wanted everything. And so I started just going to shows constantly, started just getting paying as much attention as I possibly could, talking to as many people as I could. Similarly to how I sort of got into this space too. You know, you just once the like light switch goes off, then you're just like, I need all of this. I need to absorb as much of this as I can. You know, and it can be tough sometimes, but because you do absorb all of it and you start to figure out the flaws behind a lot of it too.
Yeah.
But it's still exciting, and at the end of the day you learn a lot. So yeah, I would just say that year in particular, like 1996 for me was really sort of like the year where I decided like how I was going to learn, how I was going to take in information, and sort of that was the path that I wanted to be on. I knew in that moment, you know, like I'm going to be working in music for the rest of my life in one way or another.
Yeah, that's sick, man. It's beautiful to have a call in that early. You know, you mentioned I think your point about Weezer and the sophomore album being your favorite, and that being the case for a lot of bands. It's very interesting. One question I'm curious your take on this. I mean, you've obviously, you know, you've worked with big bands, small bands. You've been, you know, relatively big band yourself. You know, what is your view? I mean, I always come back to this this quote, even though I like them, they're not necessarily my favorite band, but you know, with Julian Casablancas and the Strokes saying like, why does everything that gets really, really huge have to suck? Like, well, why can't there be something big that's like also good? And I think there are some examples. Like I would argue that like a band like Radiohead somehow has gotten really big and still puts out good stuff, or maybe someone like Bjork is really big but still puts out good stuff. But it is kind of rare. It seems like after a while, bands kind of start to peter out. What is your view on that? Do you agree with that premise? Do you disagree? Like, what is the secret to being both commercially successful, maybe in that pop sense, but like also like always pushing the edge, you know, doing something that's beautifully artistically?
I think fans of music, like mainstream fans of music, are just pure punishers. Like people just love to punish bands for success. You know, like that was when I was growing up, that was the thing. It's like, oh, this band sold out, you know?
Yeah,
and it's because, I don't know, like it's such a weird kind of twisted thing, the way these things work. Cause it's like music is so unbelievably magical and special that when you find the thing, especially when you find it in like a basement one night where you go to see this band, but the opener like flips your lid. That's my new favorite term. The opener just like blows your mind. You're like, wait, who are these people? Where did they come from?
Yeah.
Like, you know, you're like, what's happening? And you discover that. And when you discover that, you take this like crazy ownership of this band, and no one else like, I can't believe I just found, it's like you're just found, you know, it's like you just found $1,000 on the street and you're like, yeah, no, yeah, exactly. You just, you know, so when that band gets successful down the road, you start to think like, oh, well, they're not as special. It's like now, because it's like a high or something, you know, it's like, you have to start, it's like you lose that magic a little bit. You lose that ownership a little bit because now it's sort of a lot of people own it. And so you want to go out and you want to recreate that magic again with somebody else. And so you kind of throw that band out the window, which sucks so bad. You eventually come back to them, like thank God for nostalgia or something, you know, like you eventually come back but it's weird. I mean, the music business is such a weird business, and it's such a shitty thing to be in, to participate in on the band side, because it's like most bands, if you talk to them, and artists don't really want to do a lot of the things that they have to do. They just, what they want to do is make music. That's what they did. That was the thing that you liked. And if it just happened to get successful and a bunch of people liked it too, you have some level of sustainability at that point, but there's also a lot of pressure that comes with it. And you have to, you know, depending on what your situation is and who you're involved with, there's a lot of things you sort of feel compelled to say yes to. And, it sucks, you know, and like, and a lot of those things that you have to say yes to, like they're cheesy, and people will look at you and be like, oh, why are they playing this stupid tour? Or like, why are they going on tour with this band? Like, this band sucks, you know? And it's like, well, we're going to get paid and we want to make another record, or somebody said we had to, or else we weren't going to get this opportunity. And you suddenly start having to make decisions like that like, are credibility decisions, but it's like, well, we have to sacrifice a little bit of credibility in order to maintain, you know, this creative thing that we have somehow been able to harness enough to make money from and be able to live. So it just kind of sucks. It sucks when fans sort of don't take that, can't see that, But
Totally.
most people don't have access to that. So of course, why would they? And it's hard for a band to just complain all the time and be like, well, you guys don't understand how hard it is to be in a band. And they're like, oh yeah, sure it
Yeah.
is. Rock stars. I'm sure it's real
Yeah.
hard. But
Those are
but it is though. Yeah. I mean, like it is rough. I mean, a lot of people
yeah.
they don't know. They don't see the side. I mean, I remember like when I was 15 or something, I was attempting to start a little record label, and I wanted to put out a comp, and I started figuring out how to contact a bunch of these bands, and I got this dude from Bracket on the phone, and I couldn't believe it. It was like blowing my mind that he just answered the phone. I'm like, how did I get this guy? Because in my head, I just pictured him like living in a mansion or something, but it's like he was in a punk band from like Minneapolis or something, it's like he was probably still living with his mom. He didn't like they could barely even there. And so then when I started working in the venue a couple years later, you realize like, oh, these people, none of these people have any money. None of these people, they're just like trying to make music. They still have day jobs, like they're mowing lawns and stuff so they can save up enough money to get in a van and like go play some regional shows somewhere, just enough to get back to not get fired or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it's a crazy place. And so it's just sort of sad and interesting how the journey is. It's like, they don't suck. Every band that gets popular doesn't suck. It's just that sort of, I think that's just it's the way that it's the reaction that sucks. It's sort of the reaction that's the part that is a bummer.
Super fair, and maybe changing the industry will change some of these incentives, which I want to touch on. But I guess maybe the point that I was trying to make is, maybe this comes with having like really big commercial success first. But it does seem like there's two kinds of things going. There's certainly for most people, they don't have enough sort of financial whatever cushion to like yeah, I get it. Like you got to be able to pay the fucking bills, and like it is what it is. But I also see that like a lot of artists, as they do keep getting bigger, it does seem like they maybe try and follow more trends or try and keep that kind of like, I don't know, like fame thing going. Whereas, I'll give you an example, like the best example I can come up with, David Bowie. Massively commercially successful and always pushed the envelope. Like,
Yeah.
even his last fucking album, Black Star, amazing. My favorite album is Outside, which he made with Brian Eno in the 90s.
Yeah.
Weird as shit. And yet he kept selling. Is there something just special about that personality type of like, I'm going to reinvent no matter what?
Well, yes. And few people can do that. And especially these days, it's really tough. I mean, I was just talking to somebody not too long ago about this. Like back in the sort of the early days of music, the 60s and 70s and the 80s and 90s, you were allowed to sort of develop as an artist. That's why you can see these artists that were like the 60s and like the Beatles, or let's talk about the Beatles again. In the 70s, they start getting a little bit more groovy, and like, the early days of the Beatles is very bubblegum pop, sort of British invasion. And then they meet Bob Dylan, they start doing drugs and things get a little bit more trippy. And then they start going on tour and people are sending them records. Yeah, exactly. People are sending them records. And so they start implementing all these other things. And then, in their solo careers, you can hear Paul McCartney goes into the 80s and he's making synth records. He's making records with Paul McCartney or with Michael Jackson. He's making disco, people sort of roll that into 70s music, into like disco and yacht rock and things. And the record labels were supportive of that because that was a thing that it was still, because of radio, I guess, because of top 40 radio, the way that system worked, it sort of allowed people to do that. There was more development. So the record labels had more money. And they were just more sort of, I guess, friendly to the idea of allowing an artist to take a chance. I mean, there's bands like, I think when I was talking to somebody about this not too long ago, it was about the band 10cc. There's this band 10cc who you might, there's a handful of like pop songs you would recognize, and you'd be like, oh, I know that band. I didn't know it was them. But then if you go listen to their records, they're so weird. Like they're so totally strange. And I had that experience. I was in Japan and I was in a record store and I was like, what is this? Like, what is this record? This is like the craziest song I've ever heard in my life. What is this? And I'm like a student of 60s and 70s music. So I was shocked that I didn't know what it was. And the guy at the counter just sort of like held it up, the record. And I'm like, I'm buying that right now. It's this record sheet music. But then when you go like sort of study the trajectory of that band, you see, like, it's really cool. They were allowed to do stuff like that. And David Bowie was allowed to do stuff like that. And even people like Beck, you know, is a good example, or Radiohead. There are artists, you know, when they, I think there's two things. Like, one, it just, the music business was a different place then, and it allowed for that. But then also, you just have these types of artists that just, I guess, don't back down, you know, like they have a plan, they know who they want to be, and they don't let go. And I think that's really important. Like, I've always been like that. You know, if you just say sort of outright, like, hey, I'm going to go into this agreement with this whoever, you know, record label or whatever it is, you have to be really upfront about, like, this is who I am. I'm not going to sway from this. So if you're okay with that, if you're allowed to give me, if I'm able to have creative control, then I'm going to use that, you know, to the best of my abilities. And then you end up with really interesting kind of unique stuff, and it doesn't always land for people. But at the end of the day, the person, you know, is just being themselves and really being creative, which is the most interesting part about it. So, and then the cool thing about that too is, like, yeah, maybe you don't like that David Bowie record when it comes out, but then you just discover it later, you know, like when your tastes change and you realize, like, oh, I understand now. I actually understand what he was doing on that record.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and I have that experience specifically with him all the time. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit, because I think you mentioned a really important point, which is that you know, similar to Bitcoin, incentives rule the world, and that's probably the case with the music industry as well, and a lot of creative industries. So you're in a very unique position in that you're someone that you know, you've, I guess, come up from just like DIY punk scene. You've been signed to major labels, Warner Brothers, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah. Elektra.
Elektra, you have run, and I think still do run your own label. You've got this merch business. Now you're building Wavlake, which we're going to talk a lot about. So you've kind of seen the whole thing. You're also, you know, enough of a nerd to understand all the tech behind each of these different waves. Could you maybe just, like, you know, explain it like I'm five, assuming, you know, we know nothing about this, you know, just kind of give a little bit of a history of how the music industry and technology went in hand from, like, you know, pre-internet, peer-to-peer file sharing, you know, the sort of Spotify or streaming age, and where you think we're headed next, and how the technology and the business incentives link up together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so big. I mean, it's such a big thing. I'm probably going to end up going on, like, the most convoluted ramble session right now of all time. So I'm sorry in advance for another one of these. But yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, it's the history of music. There's always been some format, you know, sheet music, piano rolls. Like, I'm a huge fan of Scott Joplin. We go back and listen to piano rolls from the early 1900s of what I think was, like, the invention of pop music. He was getting screwed. You know, like, there was a publisher who was like, hey, we got this dude, he's playing these incredible songs, people seem to really like it, let's figure out how to sell it, you know. And they probably ended up with a lot of the money, and he probably didn't end up with as much as he should have, you know. And stamp and repeat, and it was that all the way into you know, then you get into records and 8 tracks and cassettes and whatever, and all the way up to fast forward into when, you know, around that same time when I was like 16, 17, I started hearing about file sharing, I guess. And, you know, friends of mine would be burning CDs, and that idea wasn't new either. You know, it's like, oh, this is like the new mixtape. But it's like, but where'd you get the song? It's like, oh, well, I, you know, ripped it off of my CD. The CD, I just, like, duplicated it, which also wasn't new, you know. So it's like, most of these ideas aren't new. It's just like we just keep seeing the exact same thing happen over and over and over and over and over again. But what did seem new was the peer-to-peer file sharing seemed very new, because now suddenly you could just sort of, like, have access to things in a way that you didn't before. Because before, like, yeah, you could steal it off of, you'd have to, like, someone would have to have the record in order for you to, and you'd have to go search it out. Like, I remember when I was trying to find Beatles records, it's like, oh, this friend's dad has Please Please Me, so I can go to his house and burn that record onto a cassette tape, you know. And so it's a lot more difficult. But then when you start getting connected to a global network of peers, now suddenly everything's becoming incredibly easy to find. And so it starts to think, you know, you start to think, like, how's this going to pan out? Like, this is interesting. But, you know, so what happened then? It was like, basically, it was, you know, the people who had the money and the control sort of tried to figure out, well, okay, what can we do? Let's scare people. So you started seeing a lot of that, like let's put yeah, let's put big warning things and, big scary, like you're going to go to jail, you're going to get fined $250,000 and all things that they had tried in the past and had kind of worked before, things like that, like scaring people, putting a giant FBI warning on a VHS tape, like don't duplicate this or you're going to go to prison, that kind of a thing. It did kind of work for a minute, but not really, it really didn't. And so then they started trying to get, well, now let's get the bands involved. So you started seeing bands like Metallica and, I don't remember who else it was. In my mind, it was basically just Lars from Metallica, another Bay Area band, shout out. Basically just Lars for Metallica became like the poster boy for anti-file sharing. It's like, we're not making any money and blah, 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 which I don't think that worked either. Cause it's like I said, you're just like, oh, sure. It's really hard to be a rock star, Lars. I'm sure it's really tough, for you to not be squeezing these extra pennies out of people. Like all we want to do is listen to Ride the Lightning and not pay for it. So it didn't work. So, the really cool thing that came out of it was like an industry popped up. It's like, okay, well, this isn't, while these people were trying to fight it, some other people, and I guess, I don't know the history super well enough to know like exactly who started the concept of streaming. But I mean, the first time I heard about it was Spotify. It was my manager at the time when I was in a band told me about Spotify. And he's like, yeah, over in Europe, people are starting to kind of develop this thing where you just have access to music and they're building up a library from scratch. And so they're taking all this stuff that you could get. And it's just sort of like you pay $8 or whatever and you get access to it. And he's like, it's going to come over here. It'll probably be over in a couple of years. It's crazy. And he had also, this was a very like forward thinking person he was our manager of the band that I was in at the time. And we had gone through a lot after getting dropped from our label. We decided to just do everything super DIY. So we had experimented in a lot of stuff. And so, we were always sort of sharing articles and passing stuff around. And he at one point in time sent me an article that I've referenced a lot now called Music Like Water. And the idea was just that, someday you'll pay for things as you consume them, just because that's how everything works. Like you have a water bill, you pay for the water that you use, you pay for the electricity that you use, you pay for the food that you use. It's very efficient. There's really not a lot of waste, it's just sort of, that's typically how that's the most efficient way to pay for something that you're consuming. And that's how we paid for music for years. Is you really like this record, you would go buy the CD, or you'd go buy the record or the 8-track or the sheet music or the piano roll or whatever. So this idea of just sort of like paying a fee to have unlimited access was sort of the first step of something that was definitely a new idea. It wasn't just like, it was a format like everything else, but it was like you get the keys to the record store, and you can just go into the record store whenever you want and listen to everything whenever you want to listen to it. And it's like a membership, and so I think that scared a lot of people. It scared a lot of the record labels because they're like, how are we going to stop this? I just don't think that there's any way we're going to be able to stop this. And at a certain point they weren't, because they started enticing people by saying like, look, you're not getting any money for this music being passed around on a peer-to-peer network. And there's nothing you can do to stop that. The only thing we can do is just sort of replicate that experience and charge for it. And it's like, well, why would people pay for it? Well, just because it's easy. It's simple. It's like, it's just the ease of use. If it's only $7 a month, then that's a lot easier than having to, fumble around with torrents and be freaked out that you're going to be like, you're going to get the kid. You're going to be the kid who ends up going to jail or something because you have a Metallica record. So anyway, long story short there, what ended up ultimately happening is all the labels caved. And there were still some holdouts with bands and stuff like the Beatles and Taylor Swift and Neil Young and some others didn't want to do it. And Led Zeppelin was one that they all kind of came around late, but eventually everybody caved. And everybody caved because it was the only way to make money, and it was where the people were going, So for the first time in a long time, it was kind of like this was driven by the audience. It wasn't driven by the industry. It's kind of driven by the audience. The audience went there because it was easy for them, And so if you were a band and you wanted any shot anymore of making money from your music, you kind of had to exist there because that's where the audience was.
Yeah.
And that was fine, like it was cool. And it record labels figured out some way to commandeer it by buying stock in these companies. And so they took extra ownership. Now they're sort of doing what they do best. They're double dipping in a lot of ways. And when Spotify and some of these other companies went public, they made a shit ton of money, and it sort of became this new boom for the music industry. And then, all the while, people who were still sort of invested in the idea of a physical format still started making records. And then the last 15 years, even that industry started popping. And so they just sort of like reinvented this new concept where, again, like a hybrid, you can sort of have a music industry where there are physical elements of it because it's merchandise. Because while all this was happening, merchandise really became a thing too. Because in the 60s and 70s, there was like you could buy a shirt in the parking lot at a Journey concert or something, but there wasn't this merchandise industry like there is now. So, and that's part of it too. Like, not to get too off track, but around that time there were these things. It was getting so dire for record labels. They started doing these things called 360 deals, where they would just take a cut of literally everything. So they'd sign a band and they would say, look, we're not going to make enough money to be able to support you off of just your record. So you have to give us some of your merch and some of your publishing and some of your everything. So you started seeing like all these industries just get propped up by the record industry, which was good. It was like a short-term fix, but it was really, really bad in the long term because they ended up kind of monopolizing they ended up monopolizing a lot of things like they have now done even more so.
Wait, and so Sam, let me stop you there. This is all very fascinating. Like, just kind of like give us a sense where we are right now, order of magnitude. Spotify obviously went public, massive valuation, although I think they're still not profitable. What is like order of magnitude? How much money is flowing through that? Of that, how much is going to, who are the players? Like, how much is the band getting? How much is the label getting? And for the band or whatever, like, how much is that order of magnitude versus what they get from, say, like show sales or merch or something else?
It's really, it's so convoluted. I don't even know. It's like I don't think anybody really knows. There is like a number that tends to be sort of the, like the loose average of like on Spotify is maybe like the fifth or sixth lowest paying or fifth or sixth highest paying streaming service, and you get like 0.0003 cents or something. Whereas something like Tidal, I think is close to a penny. And I can't remember there's one that's actually, I think it's Napster actually. So Napster is now a streaming.
Still around?
Yeah, Napster's still around. It's around as a streaming service, and they still continuously pay the most, which is kind of interesting since a lot of this started from Napster. But it's like Napster, and then I think even Apple Music pays relatively well. Like anything close to a penny, I think most people think is fair. And that's what they're trying to push in Congress. There's a big bill to try to have like a livable wage for musicians, which they're saying is a penny, which it's not. It's like it needs to be way more than that, but it's like that's a good start. But at the time that was pretty close. When this started happening, like you were making about a penny a stream or more. Some places were even paying like 3 or 4 cents a stream. Wow. Google Music back in the day did, and PlayStation had a streaming service, and they were paying really well. But yeah, it's just like everything else now, like just like all these other formats and sort of cycles before it. What's happening is just the Spotify's not profitable.
Yeah.
Most of these places aren't profitable. Most of these things are owned by conglomerates that own a lot of different types of things. And so Spotify doesn't necessarily have to be profitable here because they can make some money here. They can spend money doing, getting a big podcast or something, and then take a loss over here, and they just move stuff around. And, I think that the problem there is like all those decisions are always just made for the company. And what ends up happening is they have to just start squeezing people out. And that becomes the library is the thing that gets squeezed, which means the artists are the ones that are going to get squeezed. So what happened this year, just to give you an idea, is like I think it's if you have less than 1,000 monthly listeners, or maybe it's 1,000 streams. If a song gets less than 1,000 streams, I forget the exact equation. You're not even monetized on Spotify anymore.
Really?
So there's a group, yeah, and I wish I had these numbers in front of me, but it's basically like 97% of Spotify's library isn't. Hold on, let me think of the best way to say this. I think it's like 3%. Most of the money that's paid out by Spotify goes to 3% of the artists on Spotify. So 97% of the artists are essentially making nothing comparatively. So, like before, not to get too far ahead, but with Wavlake, that would be the group that we're going for. We're going for the 97%. And people ask like what's going to be the incentive to get the bigger artists over? We really don't care, because there's such a huge pool of people who are making nothing that if they can suddenly make something, and that's been the really kind of the eye-opening thing for a lot of people. Like when you take somebody who's literally has never made a penny off of music, or maybe a penny, has only made a penny off of music, and suddenly they make 50 cents.
That's crazy.
That 50 cents is not a lot of money, but it's 50x what they made before, and so it hits you for a second where you're like, wait, I can scale this now, because I can't logically think how I can scale a penny, but I can scale 50 cents into something else, into $1, and then I can scale that dollar into that. And then, so I think, it's bad. Like right now it's really bad. It's really horrible. Like just to try to put it as simply as you possibly can. It's terrible. I mean, it's like everything else. It's like everything else in the world. Like it's very difficult out there.
If you're not in the 1%, it's very difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult. And especially if you're a creative person trying to make money off of art, you can barely make money at a regular job right now, let alone making art, so.
Well, I always think that Bitcoin is the real Occupy Wall Street, so maybe Wavlake is the new Occupy Spotify.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's what needs to happen is to try to connect the dots a little bit. Like these cyclical things just kept happening until we got to peer-to-peer file sharing. That was the new thing. And it's, trying to articulate this in the best way. It's kind of like the way the internet came to be too, and why we like Nostr. And we've heard people say this stuff a lot. It's like the internet had a lot of potential and it could have gone certain ways, but because of big tech bubbles and the iPhone certainly, and apps, and how things just got packaged in these little retail, as retail products, the internet kind of became more important in these little boxes. Yeah. So if you want to use the internet, you're going to use it in a specific way, because you're going to use this box and this box and this box, instead of, while you do have access to the entire internet, you don't really use the entire internet like I used to when I first started messing around with it when I was 14, because you're discovering things, because it's just, it is what it is.
Wait, so Sam, let me stop you there before we jump where you're headed next, which I think is going to be very fascinating. So just so I have, again, and I know it's all very convoluted, but just some rough order of magnitudes. The audience has this as well. So like, if the artist, so let's just say, I don't know what Spotify's revenue is. I'm curious what that number is. But let's say, I don't know, it's in the revenue for June 2024, $3.81 billion. Net income's only $274 million though. So whatever your best guess is at how much money is just flowing through Spotify, order of magnitude, if it's $10 billion, how much of that pie is going to the top 3% of bands versus how much of that is going to, I don't know if it's the publishers or the labels, because I've heard some of these labels or publishers, I don't know, and maybe you can explain the difference between that, like that they're doing pretty well in this system. I don't know if that's true or not. But
yeah, most of it's going to, it is so, things are so, just especially once you start getting into that territory, like you're a pop star.
Yeah.
There's so many hands in that pot, so, like to say, Snoop Dogg was on a podcast not that long ago. Maybe it's been a couple of years now, but I think he said he had 45 million streams on some song and he had barely made anything. I forget what the number was, but it was just like, I made $10,000 off 45 million streams or something crazy like that.
So who's making all the money?
it's the labels, the publishers. I mean, that's the thing. Like, you don't, when Snoop Dogg says something like that, you don't really know Snoop Dogg's situation. Like, I have friends who, and you, I mean, you hear about it. It's like, Bruce Springsteen just sold his entire catalog, you know, or whatever for this, or the David Bowie estate. They sold the David Bowie catalog. And so, yeah, David Bowie's not making any money off of those streams anymore. You're still making money off of, like, you're making publishing, like, royalties through broadcast royalties and things like that, because your voice is still being broadcasted over the internet. So there's certain royalties that you're still making, but, yeah, I mean, as far as like that top 3%, I don't know. My guess would be probably, you know, still like 60 or 70% of that's going to the industry, while maybe 30% of that gets distributed out to the bands, you know, to the artists. And those artists and these artists are huge, you know, like we're talking Beyonce and Jay-Z and Kanye and U2 and Coldplay. Like, those people, they make money. They definitely still make money. And at that level, you know, even some bigger indie artists and some smaller indie labels that I'm friends with, I know they're still pretty happy about streaming for the most part, because they are making some money. You know, they're definitely making some money. It's not that they're not making any money at all. It's not that completely dire, but they're not making what they should at all. You know, that's the thing, is like, I pay, you know, $14 or $15 a month or whatever it is for Spotify. All of that money should be going to the artist. That's how, or at least it should be going, it should be distributed in a better way. You know, like, let's say I was buying a CD. It's sort of the same thing to some extent. You know, there's one middleman that gets cut out, but not really, because there's a markup with the store. There's still the distributor. Like, everyone still gets their hand in the pot. But the difference between what the potential that exists now and is just the idea of being able to pay for these things, or just being able to pay an artist and communicate with an artist in a way in a way that you've never been able to do before. Instead of it being these single transactions, it can be multiple transactions. It can be repeat transactions. It can be, you know, I really like this song, so I'm going to pay 99 cents for it, and the band's going to get, let's say, even in the best case scenario, the band's getting 15 or 20% of that dollar. That's great. But that's really, I'm not going to buy that track again, you know? So it's like that transaction's kind of dead. Now, if I want to support the band again in a different way, I have to, okay, well, maybe they're coming to my town, so now I'll go buy that ticket. But again, it's like dead end street. It's like I can't buy another ticket until they come back again. And maybe that won't be till next year. So I want to support them more. So when I go to the show, I buy a shirt, you know? So now I've sort of completed the circle of life for that album transaction. And now on this album cycle for this band, I'm a super fan, but all I've really done is I bought the record. Maybe, you know, I bought a couple songs on iTunes or something. I pre-ordered the vinyl. I bought a t-shirt. I went to a show, and at the end of the day, I gave them $100, you know, and that's awesome. And that's what most bands are surviving on, those super fans. And then maybe if I'm a real diehard fan, in the time off when they're working on their record, I'm paying them $5 a month as a Patreon subscriber or something, you know, and giving them a little bit of extra money so they can have a buffer and buying a shirt on their merch store or whatever, you know. So, what I want to see happen is basically just, you have this unlimited potential, unlimited ability to be able to support a band in any moment, you know, like any moment. I talk about it all the time when I'm listening to a song on Wavlake right now. One of my favorite things to do is, like, I like the song. Oh, the song is really cool. I just found it on the new releases. So I immediately just send it a zap, you know, and then I get to the chorus, and I'm a huge fan of music and production and song structure. And so I'm really impressed by the way that they got to this chorus. So then I send another zap because I think that's really cool. And then I get to the bridge, and now I'm like, oh my God, this song is incredible. So now I'm going to send a bigger zap because now I'm super impressed that they got from the chorus to the bridge in that way. And then the bridge was so good when they got there, you know, and then by the end of the song, I'm just like, that's amazing. I'm adding it to my library. I'm zapping them again. And like, maybe by the end of it, I've sent them $10 in real time. You know, I've sent them $10 in real time. There's no other way for me to do that. And so, and then if I can do that sort of from anywhere, like if there's, now we're like massively, I'm jumping ahead, but you know, it's like this idea of being able to distribute stuff in a way and interact and have that same interaction digitally across multiple, down multiple avenues. That's never been done before. Kind of what I can see happening here is like coming back around full circle. It's like where I think Nostr is kind of going back and sort of retroactively, we jumped into the internet really fast, and a bunch of old ideas sort of got thrown in to just help get us through it, but now there's things like Nostr that, since the like the social layer of the internet became so strong through social media, it's now very clear that it's not sustainable for creators or even people who are consuming content through social media to not be able to own their own identity and take that wherever they want. Totally. For various reasons, people getting deplatformed, or just people getting kind of screwed by algorithms, and or just people getting people getting sick of Facebook and wanting to go somewhere else, but then having to start over. It's why people end up just getting kind of trapped in these boxes. So much like I think Nostr is going to sort of fix that element of the internet, a really important element of the internet is people's ability to sort of travel throughout the internet and bring their following and who they're following with them. That's what I think, that's what we want to basically try to achieve with music, is like take this idea of this peer-to-peer world where people can sort of play curator, because that's what it was. And a lot of, I was discovering so much new music in the peer-to-peer world because people were just like, I don't know, I just downloaded, this guy had this of Montreal song that I really liked on his torrent. And so then I just downloaded everything he had because I just figured if he had this song that I liked, he probably has some other stuff that I like too. Yeah. It's kind of like the early days of playlists or something. It's like, oh, well, if this playlist has this on it, then I'll listen to the whole playlist because there's probably a bunch of other good stuff on it. And the mixtape, same as a mixtape. So I think, I don't know. It just, what needs to happen is the music industry needs to just, it was almost completely uprooted, but it happened so fast and in such a weird way without enough planning that it was able to be kind of commandeered again. Much like, the banking industry or something when it crashed in 2008. It's like something should have changed, but it didn't. They got bailed out and a bunch of things, and I don't know. I'm getting way too off track.
So I want to bring this back because I think there's a lot of really cool ideas you're exploring there, but specifically to music and a bit sort of what your vision for Wavlake is and sort of the solution in the music industry. I think a lot of people, maybe that have listened to this show or into Bitcoin and Nostr, and they probably at least heard of Wavlake, maybe they played with it, but they think of it as like, oh, it's cool, it's Spotify, but I can like zap people. I'm like, that's cool, whatever, but it's not like going to change everything. But as we've discussed in recent conversations, that is not at all the plan you have. Wavlake in its current iteration is a toy, and it's great. It shows people some of the potential. You have much, much grander plans. Maybe you can give us the master thesis for where you're going.
Yeah, kind of what I was getting at, I guess, is, it needs, the distribution model is what really needs to change. And the way that people can interact with music is still in the way that like the early internet stuff, how the internet came to be. Is like, if you want to interact with music, you have to interact with it in a box, like through Spotify or through Apple Music or whatever your player of choice is. And we don't think that that's good because none of these companies are really scaling. And if they are, never making money. And if they are, they're generally making money in other areas. So, if that's the case, then the artist is going to ultimately get screwed. And we know the end of the story because we've just seen it happen for 100 years. So the idea is the distribution. That was really the big sort of aha moment. One of the first things I found, like kind of in my journey of going down this was an app called Sphinx, and Sphinx had the ability to listen to podcasts through RSS and stream sats, and there was these, and still is, it's still around, you know, the Sphinx has these tribes too. So you can basically, you're creating like a community, and you could attach a podcast to the community. So if you were, you know, let's say this podcast, you go create a tribe on Sphinx. Everybody that's a fan of Max Webster and this podcast would go there, and every time you publish a new podcast, it's going to show up, and you can listen to it there. And so I thought that was really cool, you know. So I figured out, okay, well, how can I put music on RSS? I'd never, so you know, I started looking into it and started talking to Adam and Dave at the Podcast Index, and they helped me figure that out. And I had a friend who had done it with his Bitcoin podcast through Anchor, and so he kind of helped me bridge the gap and how to get a Lightning wallet and whatever. I went through this whole thing, and it was very complicated, but I got some music up on a Sphinx tribe, and I called it the Lightning Music Player, and that was around the same time, and it was incredible to me that I could do this, but it was complicated, and so that was the first thought, was like, everybody needs to be able to get this music uploaded, needs to be able to do this, but they need to be able to do this in a simple way. You know, it needs to be just as simple as uploading to TuneCore or Orchard or DistroKid or Bandcamp or whatever. It needs to feel exactly the same. So that's the idea right now with Wavlake, and really has always been, is we just want to build like an on-ramp to basically create a platform that has potential to distribute in unlimited ways. You know, we can basically just keep tapping into these, like, think of them as different sales channels, but all sort of utilizing the same stuff. So it started out with RSS. It's like, okay, we're going to distribute this. We're going to showcase this on our player, on our desktop. But behind the scenes, there's this library that anybody can access. It's just an open library, and we're going to have to build it from the ground up, you know. So it's going to take a long time, and it's going to be it might be sort of frustrating at times, but you know, you've seen Bandcamp is a really good example. They built a library from the ground up. They just sort of had a business model that they wanted to stick to their guns, and they did. And they just did it exactly how they wanted to do it. And they built a really cool community. And they built a really huge library of music from purely from scratch. So the idea was, yeah, let's just create, similarly to Bandcamp, similarly to SoundCloud, let's create a library of music. But instead of it just being confined to Bandcamp, it can be distributed anywhere. So if you like the Bandcamp library, you can take the Bandcamp library and build it into an app, you know, or you build it into something else. And at the time, we thought it was just going to be RSS, because that's really all that was out there. But then when we launched in January of 23, you know, a couple weeks before that, Jack posted about Nostr, and we started looking into that and realizing, oh, this is the social element of this too, because it was on our roadmap. Like someday far down the road, we'll be able to implement some like social elements of this, so that people can interact with this. And there are some, you know, there are definitely some ways you can interact now through like boostograms and stuff over RSS, but through Nostr, it was clear super fast, like, oh, we can pull a lot of these features in really close now. Like, we can start working on these things, these social elements of Wavlake, but then even more so, this is another distribution channel. So even the idea of of this wide distribution model, we're able to showcase that even faster than we thought we were going to be able to. And so, you know, now where we're at, a couple years later, it hasn't taken that much time. Like, we have a lot of people look at Wavlake like a Spotify thing. You know, it's like, you know, we did a pitch thing at a conference, and one of the questions was like, well, how are you going to compete with Spotify? And it's like, oh, well, we're not. You know, it's really not what we're doing. But I get why you think that that's what we're doing, because it's what it looks like. If you go and you download, I mean, we have an app, it's still in beta, but if you go download it, it just looks like a music player. And so you might just think that's what this product is, without thinking about how you got how the library is being put there. So it's really fun to highlight now, like when I'm showing people what Wavlake is, I do a few things. I'll open up the Wavlake mobile player, and I'll zap a track and I'll comment on it. And they'll be like, oh, wow, that's really cool. And I'll be like, yeah, look, the band just got paid. And maybe I'll do it to one of my tracks. And so then I'll open up my browser window, and I'll show them that, look, I just got paid. That comment that I made shows up right here. So me as an artist now, I just saw that, like, we're in this living room talking about this new project or whatever, but on the artist side, I just got paid, and it's right there, and it's awesome. That would have never happened, doesn't happen in the old world, because that payment would take months to get, and that payment might be a fraction of a penny, whereas in that living room, that payment was $1 because I was able to do that. Then I go and I open up Fountain, Fountain, another great app, which now if you go to download Fountain, it says Fountain Podcasts and Music, because they're pulling in our library as well as some other music libraries that are now starting to sprout up. Ours is sort of contained to Wavlake, but there's also some other companies that you can upload, and it just sort of goes out to the RSS world. We're not exactly comfortable with doing that yet, because there's still a lot of gray area, I think, with sort of how this stuff can be consumed, and we want to make sure artists are protected. And so we're sort of keeping it in this box for now, and then as things come along, we'll be able to open it up into more spaces. But right now, it's sort of fair game. Anything that can be monetized through a Zap or a Boost, you can pull this library in and create something out of it. So, then you go to Fountain and you see that exact comment. You see the same Boost. You see everything there. Then I go and I'll pull up, like a podcast episode that features one of my tracks, and I'll zap that, and then you'll see that, it's like, now we're listening to now I'm boosting this inside of a podcast. I go back and I show them again in my dashboard that I got paid for it. I go, and then you go and you see that activity also happen in the mobile app. And so, the interoperability of it is really cool. And that's something that I think a lot of people aren't able to wrap their head around right now, like how that's happening, or even what's happening. But it does seem to be one of the things when I'm in person, I can just show somebody that we just did this in all these different places. And as far as the artist was concerned, they only had to do one thing still. They still just had to upload this track, the potential of where that track could then live and be monetized is now unlimited, And so it's a really big idea, but the idea is we're just building an open distribution channel where anybody can build anything and absorb this library. And when they create this thing, anybody can pay the artist from there. So wherever you live, wherever you're consuming your music in the future, you'll be able to have this same type of interaction. And it won't be based on an agreement that happened behind closed doors between the streaming service and the record labels of the streaming service and the rights holders. It's just the same, it's like, it's open. So the negotiation is between the listener and the creator, and the person in the middle is just sort of facilitating that handshake, which is the big difference. Like, that's the big difference, is all these builders that are going to be creating these apps with these libraries are really just making an interesting way to make that happen,
And so I think this is a really big idea. And in case this isn't super clear to everyone listening, it's like, this is like an open or almost an open source music library, in the same way that, Bitcoin is sort of an open money. Nostr is now an open data layer where you can, the data's out there. You can take that data and create all kinds of interesting consumption experiences. There's Primal, there's Damus, those are just the Twitter clones. And you've got all kinds of new things. Fountain, and Wavlake I know already has a Nostr login. Fountain's in a bunch of integrations recently where I can now see, any track that's shared from Wavlake on a Nostr client like Primal or Damus. I can see that automatically pop up in my Fountain feed, or I can see the podcast only. Like, there's all this incredible interoperability that comes when you have kind of one giant open data pool, and you guys are creating that open data pool for music. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the easiest way for people to understand it, I think, is even a lot of people I don't think know how podcasting works, but it is basically podcasting for music, really. Yeah. Similar, it's like
podcasting for music. That should be your tagline.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it is, and it came from that idea. It's the podcasting 2.0 spec is where all this came from. Like those guys were building, after 20 years of podcasting, adding in these new features to be able to monetize things because the writing was on the wall. The advertising market for podcasters was starting to dry up, and a lot of those numbers were inflated, and so it was just getting complicated, and so they were also getting excited by the ability to stream money, and so that's why a lot of this stuff came in for podcasting first. But yeah, that's essentially what it is. It's an open source library that can exist in any client, and that client can be a player. But the difference, I guess, between what you've maybe seen in podcasting over the last 20 years is, you may have seen multiple podcasting clients sort of come to life, and maybe most people use Spotify or the Apple podcasting app or whatever. I would say probably by number, those are probably the two biggest clients out there, but there's hundreds of them, but the thing about this is this library can exist not just in a client, so we're showcasing things by building an app, making a website, but it can be anything, and it can be monetized anywhere. So we have a thing right now that we just put out called Developer Splits, where we're basically just trying to incentivize people to get creative, to showcase other ways of how this could be utilized. So this dude Samskis, for example, we had this thing called Party Mode, which we had built for a conference. We just thought it would be a cool thing, like, you can just play a playlist or something, or play whatever you want, and then hit this button, and then it'll pop up on a TV in a way that, like, if you're just walking around, you can scan this QR code and zap the band, like, while you're at a party, but it was just, we sort of threw it together as it conceptually and wasn't maybe done the best way possible. So he was like, hey, I'm going to take this library, I'm going to take this idea, and I'm going to recreate it, and I'm going to just make it look better, And so he developed a better version of party mode, which we had, and he called it playlist party mode. And now he, as a developer, is getting 5%. He's getting half of our revenue that comes in when something gets zapped, as an incentive to go and build and showcase how all these other things, how this library can live in all these different places. It can live as just like a playlist thing for people to play at parties, and bands can get paid that way. And it could live in an app, and it can live in a podcast, and it can live on a website, and it can live in a social media stream. It can live in a film. Like, this library can be placed anywhere and be monetized in the same way.
And how do you guys, it sounds like you're taking, a small but reasonable cut of that. Is the idea that you get kind of enough network effects around your open library? Like, what's preventing someone from just forking your whole library and being like, hey, we're going to have the Wavlake library, but 0% ever goes to Wavlake?
They could. They totally could. People can do whatever they want. We welcome competition because we think that that's just going to keep us on our toes. And if that's happening, it means it's working. I love Oscar. I couldn't get Oscar to put music in Fountain to save my life. I tried, before Wavlake even existed. I was like, hey man, how do we do that? He was one of the people I got hooked up with early, him and Roy from Breeze, and because Roy had podcasting in the Breeze app. And, there were some ideas, but it never really happened. But, once we started building the library, then he's a fan of music. So he started getting excited about it and started seeing the potential, and it helps his app. And he's done a lot of really cool things that have been inspired by Wavlake, and Wavlake has now done a lot of things that have been inspired by him. And we're talking all the time, and we're doing cool things together too, sort of in unison, to try to make hey, we're, maybe two of the bigger sort of players here in this space, and there's a lot of other people, and we're going to have to unify a lot of things. So let's try to show people how good this works. That's one of the big reasons they switched their social graph outside of, their own thing into being a Nostr thing, is so that we could interact with each other. It's just such a cool thing. It sucked that if you left a comment on a Wavlake track in Nostr, it would only live there. And if you left a comment on a track in Wavlake, it would only live there. But now it lives in both places simultaneously, the second it happens, because we sort of got together and we're like, we need to unify all these things. And so, yeah, we're just together, everybody who's doing this. And there's some other people out there doing, Ellen Beats and RSS Blue, and certainly a lot of people that have been doing this in the podcasting space before we were, mostly with podcasting. Everyone's just kind of working on different stuff. And so, yeah, we're incentivizing people. Not only are we welcoming competition, but we're paying for it. We're giving people a cut of our our money to make this stuff happen, because we need to showcase these ideas. We need to show people the utility of this instead of just talking about it for the rest of our lives. That's like one of my big problems right now is like in the Bitcoin space in particular, a lot of talking. It's like people are building stuff, but like we're ready. Like the stuff is here now. Let's go show. Yeah. Let's show this to the rest of the world, guys. Like I think we're done. It's like analysis paralysis or something. I don't know what's happening, but like people seem very hesitant to get this stuff out in the world.
I do think the reality of that is there's a lot we can do, and obviously we need just more motivated builders like yourself. But I also think that, like, as silly and whatever simple as it is, like no market solves all. And like I know we can't always depend on that, but like the reality is, like I think you've got the tech ready. Like this cycle was repeated many times. I think it's got at least one more in it. At some point it'll flatten out. But like the reality is, you build in the dark for 3 years. It's fucking awesome. No one gives a shit because what the hell is Bitcoin? This is some weird cult. Oh my God, at 10x, I can make money playing it on Wavlake. And anyways, I'm a simple left side of the curve guy. I think that's what's going to happen next year.
Yeah.
We'll find out.
Well, there's very few existing applications of the Lightning Network, like showcases of the Lightning Network and Nostr, that have the potential to pull in millions of people overnight. Yes. Try to think of one. I'm sure maybe it's like
Stacker News.
Yeah, there's not a ton. There's really not a ton. To me, and I guess I'm a little biased, but it's like, to me, these are the apps that should be really being, people need to be talking about this stuff, because this is it. Like these are the things that are going to, it's like I say it all the time, like we're developing really like quickly, but also sort of cautiously, because we need to make sure we have a really strong foundation for what's going to come. Like there's no doubt in my mind it's going to come, and it can happen. It's one artist starts it. That's it. That's all it takes. You only need to convince one to do it.
And we kind of have a little bit. I mean, I saw that Forbes article that you and Fountain were both featured in. It's great. I mean, in the Ainsley Costello, I know she's like only one use case, but like I forgot exactly her amount. Maybe it's $12,000 or something. She's made through streaming and or through Lightning streaming. And I'm sure on Spotify that's been like 12 cents. So even though it's not...
Yeah, in her entire career, she had made, I think, $750 or something in years, over 63 different services and everything. And now she just hit a year in July, is when I met her dad and when all this stuff started happening. And yeah, she's made like 12 or 13 grand. And some of that's been through live streaming performances. And a lot of it's just been on Wavlake. I mean, she was the first artist to make 1 million sats on Wavlake, which was a big milestone for us. And that's... at that time, Bitcoin was 30 grand, so it's like, it's like, it's I mean, I don't like talking about, I feel like a lot of times we end up talking about the money, but because, people don't want to focus on the money, but it is important. Like it is important. And it's especially important to see that money grows. That's the cool thing about it's like deflating against what so even if as our cut from Spotify has been watered down, that would be bad enough on its own. But then on top of that, our currency has also been devalued, massively. So it's like, even 10, 15 years ago when Spotify started, even if it was the same fraction of a penny would have been worth however much, a multiple, much more, the buying power of that too. So that's the other really cool thing about this too, is like, yes, even if it's 50 cents today, that 50 cents grows, it grows, it comes with interest on it. So the yield on it, and I shouldn't have said yield. I hate saying that. It's a shitcoin term, but,
show us your DeFi, dude.
Yeah. No, but I mean, that's how I think of it though. It's like the yield, but it's the yield on yourself. Like, it's just so cool to be able to be empowered, to see someone like Ainsley, who just, she's 20, and she's just trying to make it. Like just has a dream. She's like very, very authentic and wants to just make it. And she's seeing some hope, and she doesn't know what this is. And Bitcoin's weird. The Bitcoin bubble is weird. I'm sure it's freaked her out, but you got to hand it to her and her family. Like they've put in the time, and they see what a lot of people don't see. They didn't get scared off immediately, and they're going to be some important people. And as we move down this road, because we need people like them. We need people who are going to understand what this is now at this early stage, and be there with us when we're going and trying to fight against, because there is a fight coming at some point in time. It's going to be just like what happened with streaming. Like we will have some, the traditional music world is probably not going to be super thrilled about this when it does start happening, but they're going to have a really hot, a really bad argument, because all it's going to take is get a handful of artists to be like, look, I'm living my life. I'm making money. I'm connecting with fans. This is awesome.
I think the key thing there is like exactly what you said. For 97% of artists, like they can't make a living. Like I think that the idea, it's not rocket science. Like if you can pay your bills and do music full time, and you can do that in your ecosystem, and you couldn't do it on the old ecosystem, game over. Just
Right.
like game over.
Yeah. And if they can make money, imagine what the 3% can do,
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
if there's a system that works so that when that one of those 3% artists is like, hey, cause yeah, I mean, someone asked us the other day, you focus a lot on the small artists. What about the big artists? What's their incentive? And that's when we did a little bit of research and came and found that number that it's 97% is our pool. That's a pretty big cut of that pool. But you can find Snoop Dogg and Kanye and Taylor Swift and some other people. Go Google it. People that are not like James Blake just started his own sort of thing, which is another paywall model thing. But you can find superstars being just as pissed off about this, even though they're still making millions of dollars.
Bro,
And it's not that they're greedy, but it's just like it's just the principle of it. Yeah, it's the principle of it. It's like you should, just because you're making, like, if the money's out there to be made, it should be, I don't know. It's very easy to corrupt, and there's no accountability in that system. And that is the biggest problem. It's not even that there's not money, but it's just the accountability that is really the issue.
Well, and it comes back to, again, same thing with the money, transparency. Like people, like I was talking with some buddies in the sauna. I'm somewhat of a sauna maximalist, as I was chatting with MBK.
Love a sauna.
Science. Yeah, whenever you come to SF, man, we'll go swim in the bay and do a sauna. But Banya.lol, which is a great site. Anyways, and this is I was actually getting some ideas from him for this conversation. He's a producer, young guy, or not that young, I guess young compared to me now, but like 26 or something. And his general gist, he didn't obviously understand all of this because this is complex with Bitcoin and Nostr, blah blah. But his general gist was like, dude, I don't know exactly how I'm getting fucked, but I know I'm getting fucked. Like,
Right.
I'm getting fucked with the taxes I pay, with my money not being able. Like he's like, I can't buy shit anymore. I know I'm getting fucked. Where's it going?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's no. There's no way. I mean, to do an audit is so complicated. To audit the music industry. Like imagine that.
Yeah.
It's yeah. You just don't know. I mean, it's like I have a record, that one record that was on Elektra. Man, I don't know. Like I think we still owe them $1 million. How? I don't like. Tell me how. I couldn't do that math and ever come up with that number. That like we've never recouped anything. Oh, okay. How's that possible? Sold a lot of records, but somehow no recouping, huh? Okay.
Transparency. People just want transparency. So
Yeah.
So there's a couple more things I want to touch on in music, then I have a couple closing questions because I know I've kept you for a while. But one big thing I want to touch on again is this. You guys have the open model you're building. Like you said, though, it's forkable. Anyone could take out whatever cut Wavlake is getting very easily. So one thing that I think a lot about in terms of Nostr and open source in general is because that's true. It's easy for anyone to fork something and monetize it in their own way. The way I see it, and tell me how you see it, that requires the entrepreneur or the company to figure out how to not only capture value, but more importantly, add more value than they're capturing with that specific library. So one thing that I'm thinking of here is like, okay, I could just fork from anywhere, but maybe I'm going to license the music directly from the Wavlake app because you guys provide additional services on top of that. For example, brokering between a film that has a big budget and the artist themselves, and that service is added on top of only the Wavlake library. Is that the right way to think about how the
Yeah, I mean, there's aggregates you have plenty of choices on how you want to get your music out into the streaming platforms today. And you have to make that decision based on who is going to offer you the best service. Because it's like if TuneCore, I need my music on Spotify and Apple Music and all these things, so I can go to TuneCore. Okay, well, why would I go there? Well, they charge this amount, and DistroKid charges this amount, or they don't charge me anything, but then they take a cut. It's like you have to sort of make those decisions, and then also, yeah, maybe they have these extra features. Maybe they have some services for sync licensing, and maybe they have some publishing collection services because they are connected to all these channels. So yeah, maybe they act as like an independent publishing company for you, a publisher that gets you YouTube royalties that otherwise you'd have no access to. because that's another big part of it. It's like, I have a song that's playing in a commercial right now, and they just renewed for a second year, and I just realized the other day I haven't ever received an ASCAP royalty for it, and I have no way. I can't get a hold of ASCAP. Anybody out there knows anyone who works there?
By the way, ASCAP is a ridiculous name for people that don't know.
Yes, yeah. They're the people that are supposed to be like paying attention to my broadcast royalties, and it's like I can't even get a hold of them, and they haven't paid me, and there's no accountability for that. So it's like, yes, it's the thing that's gonna the thing that we'll have to do is we'll have to obviously have a better service. Like that's our goal. We just want to be the toolkit for the artists to be able to do whatever they need, whatever they want to do. I guess that's probably the best way to put it. Right now, you have a lot of tools that are sort of widely spread out. It's like you have Patreon, you have your streaming service, you have all these different things that you have social media, whatever. You really have to you have to keep up on all the way that those things are designed. You have to keep up on all of them in order for them to stay fresh and alive. And so it becomes very daunting and exhausting for a lot of artists. And eventually they just sort of give up, And when you give up, you lose your momentum, you lose the algorithm push or whatever, and it just ends up you just end up falling into a void.
Yeah. So one last sort of thing on the music and Wavlake side before we wrap up with a few other questions. I think a lot about in the Nostr world, what new business models and new, creative experiences are net new that can only exist in this new Nostr Bitcoin Lightning world. And two that I'm, thinking a lot about, I need to potentially write this up in a blog post at some point, but two ideas I can't get out of my head. One is what I'll call the remix economy, and one is the rise of the curator. So the remix economy, the best example I've seen of this by far was actually in music, although I think this will apply for any creative medium, including code. But it's just this the Stemster idea, Stemster for everything. Like, hey, I put out a sick song with a sick beat. Great. I now, as a rapper, I'm going to take that. I'm going to cut you into it. I'm going to rap on top of it. And now, the reason, in my mind at least, that I cut you into it instead of just like jacking it and stealing it and sharing it myself is now, like Bitcoin, I've created the incentive so that we create a thicker, what I call value waterfall, or pie, a bigger pie. And now we're both incentivized to share the original work, the derivatives of that, because it all flows back into this one stream. So that's one idea I'm thinking a lot about. And the other is the rise of the curator. Like, can we find a world where, as AI just creates more and more information and more things are AI assisted, human taste is still very valuable. And those people that have great taste, that are, live DJs, can get paid for that curation, which interestingly is something I see Tidal starting to play with some of their artist radio stations. I'm guessing one day that'll be Nostr and Lightning powered as well. What are your thoughts on these two business models or creative opportunities and other ones that may arise?
Yeah, I mean, I really liked what Stemster was doing, and I think there were some holes in that too. I mean, there are in our thing as well. I mean, you have to sort of think long term. How's this stuff going to scale, and what happens when this happens, and what happens when this happens? And some of the early questions with Stemster was like, okay, cool. It's great to have all these collaborators, and they're all getting paid when the transaction happens on Wavlake because you can do splits and stuff. But what happens if we want to get this now out into a bigger music account, like upload it to Spotify because we love this song? It can't really exist in a way. It's just it was just more difficult to do it that way. But yeah, I mean, I think we've sort of daydreamed about having those types of things available in Wavlake at some point in time, being able to like do remixes, like having a marketplace for libraries and having set certain prices on those, like you can use this for this at the split level, those types of things. Like, yeah, you can remix this track or you can use it in your DJ set, but you have to give me 20% of your splits or whatever. Right. And so you could sort of see things like a marketplace emerging for like royalty-free music libraries, where you can just connect through the transaction. And you can like through various licenses in the future, you could set terms for things like that. Like you could say, you can use this in your podcast as bumper music, but you have to pay me this percentage of your show or whatever. Music curation, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff. We have a ton of ideas around that. I mean, just on the simplest one, sort of the live DJ thing that I think you mentioned, it's like we have these music podcasts right now that you can do, but they're still pretty complicated. It's kind of like the early days of uploading the music to RSS. It's like you could do it, but it was hard. You can create a music podcast, but you still have to go download all the files. You have to get them into a music interface. You have to edit the whole thing together. Then you have to get all the payment information and put it in your RSS feed and do all the splits and the time splits and stuff. And you can do it, and you can do it pretty simply on Wavlake. We implemented that, but it's still hard. So wouldn't it be cool if you could just think of like a new form radio station? You know, basically, I'm going to go live. I'm a DJ, like just like I am on my music podcast, but I'm actually just doing this live now. So now I'm live. I hit a button on Wavlake, and now I'm live. And I just go I start going through my Wavlake playlist, and all that stuff is happening in real time live because it's all connected to this network. So that's another really good example of like, that's a distribution channel that's just waiting to be unlocked. Is just playing live music, playing radio that is now monetized in real time, because you could be listening to that radio on Fountain and paying sats, you know, streaming sats per minute. You could just be, you know, sitting at work and then zapping a big fat zap, and you find a cool song that you like, just like when you would go buy a record if you heard a song on the radio. So, yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, plus DJ sets. I mean, like actual DJ sets, you know, not like radio DJs. Yeah, there's so many cool, I mean, you name it, like anything that exists, we can basically tap into with this library.
Yeah.
You know, even just like mixtapes, like this, someone uploaded a mixtape to Wavlake a few weeks ago, and we were like, hey, this is super cool. Everybody was really pumped on it because it was fun, but it was filled with music that wasn't on Wavlake. So none of it could be monetized. It was really obscure stuff. So, you know, we didn't take it down, but we just sort of politely, we didn't even ask to take it down. We're just like, hey, I was just like, hey man, this is cool, but like next time, you know, you might want to think about taking it down, because these are struggling artists it is obscure stuff, which means they're struggling even more. And like, it kind of sucks that you're making money and they're not. But this idea is so fun and people really like it. You should just do this there's a huge library of 10,000 tracks on here that you could use. And when you're getting zaps on these tracks, you could be an active participant in those splits as well. And you know, things like creating playlist curation. I was just talking to somebody on Nostr, to Samsky's actually on Nostr, about this. Like, we have ideas of like getting paid to curate cool playlists. And he was like, well, what happens? You have a playlist of 200 songs and you zap the playlist. Does everybody just get paid in it? And I was just thinking how that could scale. And it's like, no, but maybe if you create a playlist and you share that with your friend, and your friend has some actionable thing, like they zap a track or they add it to their library, or there's some monetary transaction that happens there, then all of you become, then the band and the person who put the song in that playlist also get a cut. And you know, artists could use that to their, like as a street team, like, hey, go share these tracks, and they could even set terms like, yeah, hey, this is my, you know, go for the next 6 months. Like this record just came out. So if you guys share these tracks and people pay me for them, zap me, I'm going to give you 30% of all zaps that come out in the next 6 months. You know, and that's an idea that we have and things that can happen. And listening to earn, that we have that coming out. We've been talking about that for a couple of weeks, but we have a thing we're calling Top Up, which is basically, you know, it's like, yeah, you want people to hear your track, get a budget of 100,000 sats out there, and you can just pay people to listen to it. And it's not even like a pay for play thing. It's like you're onboarding people. That's the way that we're looking at it. It's like, okay, cool. That means that now you can go tell all your fans to go download Wavlake and start zapping you there, and you can give them their first 100 sats to start playing around with it, you know? So
yeah, it's badass. And just to be clear on that, when you talk about the music podcast, even though there is a lot of friction, there's still a lot of adoption. Like there's like dozens of these music.
Oh yeah, and they're great. They're so great. I mean, we used to do a couple. We just stopped doing one of them called Mixtape, but we still do just our regular bi-weekly podcast that we do with Wavlake called Waveform. We drop a couple songs in it. You know, it's like we're mostly talking about nerdy stuff, but then we're like, let's play a song. And then when we do, if you zap during that moment, the artist gets paid. It's really cool.
That's super dope. Cool, man. All right, so we talked a lot about all kinds of crazy things in the music industry. Two last areas that I want to touch on with you. You know, one is I don't think many people realize this. Hell, I didn't even realize this until recently. But in addition to being an artist, a DIY tinkerer, founder of Wavlake as well, co-founder with Michael, you also are an entrepreneur in many different realms. I knew you had your merch business. I won't divulge any secrets there, but it's like a pretty successful merch business, as I recently learned. You apparently, I think, have a label. You have a studio or like a venue space in Arizona. Like you've got your hand in a bunch of different pies. But like doing very very well. Like I was wildly impressed. I was already impressed, but I was like, wow. So I guess my first question to you and all that is like, how do you do all that? What is a day in the life of Sam? Like how do you produce at such a high level across a variety of different venues?
I'm a pretty busy dude, to put it lightly. But
Yeah.
I mean, all these things, it's all the same. It's all connected. Like all of these things sort of work in tandem with each other. It's like I do the Lightning Store, but I own a merch company, and so it's really easy to do that because I have a screen printing shop in a building, and I have like a fulfillment center, and I fulfill all my orders when I'm there because I like doing it for fun. But when I'm not, someone else can because that's a business that I have. And I work with the company's Hello Merch, and I work with like 400 bands, so that I work with a lot of bands and a lot of cool new independent artists, but also a lot of really big major artists, legacy artists that you would have heard of. And someday I'm gonna have some really fun conversations with those people when Wavlake is ready for them. And all these things are, and go on Spotify right now and there's a merch section. There's definitely a world someday where Hello Merch is going to connect to Wavlake, and all these things are going to talk to each other. So to me, I made a decision. I've done a lot of things. I've definitely done a lot of things that have been distractions in my life, and those things I had to let go. They were fun projects, but at the end of the day, I just had to, kind of walk away from them. And now I only do things that I can see helping the thing that I'm currently working on, so that they all sort of work together, and then big picture could potentially even, come together at some point. These are just things that are going to be very helpful. Like, even this thing I do called Wastoids is just, I've talked to you about it before. It's just sort of like a fun, sort of like video zine podcast thing I do. But, we talk a lot about independent music and music curation, and we're on Fountain, and we're sort of experimenting as like a DIY kind of like music industry podcast. Can something like that sort of exist in this space, So it's an experiment, I'm experimenting with all these things. So to me, it's sort of like the lab, with a lot of it. And I've been working in music for a long time, and that's what kind of how Wavlake even started, but now Wavlake is getting really serious, because it started out as just like, I want to see if this experiment might work, but then now it's starting to actually work. So it's like, oh shit, like, okay, like, oh man, this is working well. And it's not that it's going to work, it is working. So now it's just a matter of time before people find out about it. So we better, get our shit together here, start cranking it out.
Well, it's funny. The last area that I wanted to touch on, you already actually touched on, which was Wastoids. That's where I was going to end. I checked out. It's pretty remarkable. You interview a number of interesting artists. I don't know if it was you interviewing them or whatever. I think I saw People Under the Stairs recently. I don't know if that was you interviewing them or whatever. Would just love to know, maybe a little about some of those interviews. What are some of your most memorable ones? Who are some bands or artists you've gotten to meet that were, I don't know, shockingly interesting, surprising, or unexpected or something?
I just recently got to interview a band called Red Cross personally. I don't do a lot of the interviews. I do. I've had a podcast. I've done 50 episodes of a podcast called Click Vortex on there, which it's just like a fun music rabbit hole, like deep music nerd fest.
Oh, dude, this is sick.
Yeah. So there's cool stuff there, but then, I do this with a couple other people, and it's all hello, like kind of in the hello world. It's like we do a music news show every Friday. It's like a 5-minute music news. It's sort of just like catch up on what's been going on. And we use that to advertise the bands that we work with, but then also just really cool stuff that we see out there, So, it's just really fun. And like the guy that does that is like the customer service kid for Hello Merch, So it's like, so it's just like on Thursdays, he comes up from his desk answering emails and puts on a Dead Kennedy shirt and does the news in front of a green screen in my office. So it's just that's just really fun to do. But I really like, that one is an experiment in like music curation, making sure I mean, heavily inspired by stuff that I grew up with. Like obviously, like MTV News is
Yeah.
the news that we do every Friday is inspired by that. Um,
Cool.
cool shows like TV Party, like public access shows from the 70s and 80s and stuff. And I just want to, I love that, and I just want to keep that alive. And we, yeah, we have a show called Midnight Music Review in the Attic. It's this guy Salvador Cresta in Argentina who like dresses up like a werewolf and then interviews
What the fuck?
bands. It's
That's
really cool.
awesome.
This is a cool stuff. I mean, it's pretty out there, but it's fun. Like it's really fun. It's like sort of a throwback to things that I grew up watching and sort of discovering. So
How
yeah,
did you know this dude in Argentina?
he was like had directed a video of this band in Phoenix that I love called Astrologer, and we started following each other, and he's just like, I have like 24 hours of just crazy footage. Would you ever want to put any of it on Wastoids? And we were like, do you want to like do a show? Let's just do a show. Like we want to do an interview show. Maybe we could just this out. So it's really interesting and unique, and he's an incredibly talented dude. And we do those once a month. And then, yeah, the People Under the Stairs thing, that's a show called Hotline, which is basically we have a phone number, an 877 like toll free number. You call 1-877-Wastoids, and whatever the band is that week, you just ask them questions. So it's People Under the Stairs last week. You call and you're like, hey, we're People Under the Stairs, ask us whatever. You ask them a question, and then we sort of, on the show, it sort of looks like they're responding to an answering machine, but we just send them all the questions that come in, and then they listen to them and they respond on video, and then we splice it all together and have some animations and
That
stuff.
is
So
fucking and like I mean I have so many questions on this. I wasn't expecting all these rabbit holes to open, but like I mean some of these people like, I don't know if listeners know who People on the Stairs are, but like in underground hip hop, that's like a pretty fucking big deal. Like how do
yeah,
you know People on the Stairs? Are they one of your Hello Merch clients? And when do we get them on Wavlake?
no, they're not. No, that just came in. Yeah, so this dude that I do Wastoids with, Jason, he's kind of like my life support there. Like he's really wearing a lot of hats there, and he comes from that world. I mean, he's like me. He's a musician, and he's done a bunch of stuff, and he works at Aquarium Drunkard and has for like 10 years, and so he's very connected to sort of like the PR world. And so every once in a while we just throw out, like just I don't know, let's try for Yoko Ono, let's try for whatever. Sometimes we get them and sometimes we don't. And People Under the Stairs was one of those ones where we're just like we just wanted to see if they would do it because they're rad, and they
Yeah.
said yes, and they were super cool. I mean, they made a really cool promo for it, which was funny because just like some bands, I mean, as we start to do it more, some bands have like now go out of their way to sort of make it unique and weird, and it's really fun. Like when it first started, everyone, when their responses would just be kind of stale, it's like, oh, I'm in a hotel room just sort of answering these questions. And then a couple people started doing more unique things, like, oh, I'm going to answer this question in a restaurant while I'm eating, and then I'm going to answer this one while I'm doing push-ups or something. So you just start getting these sort of more bizarre, because it's a bizarre show. I mean, that's the whole point of it is just like kind of weird, and no one really knows what it is. But at the end of the day, it's really just we're just highlighting cool music that a lot of people don't know about.
How long have you been doing this?
3 years, I think.
Dude, this is fucking sick. Okay, and the obvious question, as I was saying, when do these people come to Wavlake? I know you say when it's ready, but like, what does that actually mean in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, things that sort of have to happen before, because right now, if I was like, hey, People Under the Stairs, try Wavlake, they will, maybe they will. And if they do, maybe they'll make some money, some sats, and maybe they'll get excited about it, and maybe they'll want to tell their fans, hey, you guys should come over here and check this out. But are they going to have to explain to them how to get a Bitcoin wallet and how to get Bitcoin and how to then move that from, okay, maybe they're familiar with Cash App. So it's like now they have to figure out how to get it from Cash App to this. And it's like, there's just so many things that have to happen. So, very soon, they'll be able, first of all, the app needs to be on the App Store, because right now it's in beta. So that's tough. So, step one is like, let's get this thing on the App Store. And then when a new user opens the app, it's going to ask them if they need a wallet, and we're going to be able to just give it to them there in the app, much like Fountain does, and then we're going to have this top up feature. So you'll immediately be like, hey, do you need some money to basically start doing this? Yes. Okay, cool. Listen to these songs. And then now they'll be able to start working. So the idea is really like, I feel like we already have the part where we can win over the bands, because
Yeah.
it doesn't take that much, because it's so gross out there for that 97% that you really get any sort of shred of hope, it's like I'm in, because it's really just another thing. It's not like you have to leave Spotify to try Wavlake. You don't do that at all. It's like this is just another thing. Just upload your music here and see what happens. And we have some ideas down the road of maybe trying to figure out how to tap into some other distribution, some of those other like traditional distribution models, sort of sneakily. Like, well, maybe we can just become one of the 65 channels on DistroKid. But then when those royalties come in, they're going to wonder why the Wavlake ones are so huge. Like, what's going on there? Wait, why did I make $700 on Wavlake and I made 9 cents everywhere else? So then maybe they'll just go look at Wavlake, but it's getting close. It's getting really close. We really just want a place for, like, the first main phase was like make something that's simple onboarding for the artists. And now we're wrapping up the stuff that's going to be the simple onboarding for the fans. Yeah. Once both of those exist, and then of course in between those two things, we've been building up a really cool library of music of like 10,000 tracks right now, and that's growing every day. That'll just get better and better, and we'll see that start to snowball, I'm sure, so that once that kicks in, it can happen really fast. But we just need to make sure that we're sort of ready on both sides.
Bullish. I was already bullish. I already bullish. And I guess just two follow-ups in that. One, I mean, the Wastoids art, like, first of all, the copywriting on this is excellent. So you guys know, I mean, some of the titles here, things like April 1994, Blur, The Boss, Kurt Cobain, Courtney Love, Enigma, The Beasties and More, Machine Gun Dolphin. You got this is all cool shit. And the fucking, like, I'm looking at the art for Midnight Music Review in the Attic. Like, this is cool as shit. Did you do this?
Salvador does all the art for Midnight Music Review. I do most of the art for everything else. And then Jason does he's like a journalist, but that's what he, but he's worked at, done stuff for Pitchfork and everywhere.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, you guys are, like, were you always just like also like a visual artist as well, or like this developed?
Yeah, that's what I started out doing. Was before I sort of discovered HTML and stuff, I would draw a lot. And then once I discovered that, then I started getting into layout, because I was doing sort of graphic design layout for websites, And then once I learned those tools, then I was doing layouts or design for merch, and then I was doing layout for the records that we were putting out. And I've always done that, like pretty much everything that I've ever, like, piece of merch or anything that's ever been affiliated with any band I've ever been in, I've done it all, because I'm just the guy who does it. But yeah, I was doing that, like, even just for money in a band before I got signed. I would just do merch for bands and, give me a couple $100 and I'll do your layout for your new record or whatever. Just doing like graphic design on the side.
Well, it's really good, man. Like, seriously, like, guys, like, and I'm not just saying this like for like Bitcoin standards, which is very low bar, but this is good by like normal like art internet standards. So like very, very well done.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. And you can find that on wastoids.com, and it's on Nostr. Just look up Wastoids. It's on Nostr. It's on Fountain. I throw all that stuff in everywhere.
And I know I just asked you this again, but like I'm honestly so impressed with all this, like, this empire you've got going. How big of a squad do you have around you? Like again, like, are you? I mean, do you have some, like, okay, first thing in the morning, like, I'm not touching any of this like social media, internet crowd. How are you so productive?
So Hello Merch I've been doing it'll be 17 years in April. So that's an operation for sure. I mean, I've had during COVID, it got really crazy because retail just exploded. So, I mean, at a certain point, I had like 50 employees. Right now, I think we're at about 30, probably. It's like down a lot, just because, I mean, a lot of that stuff was just packing orders and printing shirts. That just kind of had to scale up as that stuff happened. And then once we leveled off a little bit and things got kind of back to normal, we kind of went back to reality a little bit. But I got like 28 employees or something that facilitate most of that stuff, like the event space and the building. I have a girl who just does, Kristen, shout out to Kristen, she's like the property manager, because I have a 50,000 square foot warehouse in Phoenix that needs a lot of work, like the internet goes out, someone has to fix it, and that's Kristen, like something happens. And then we do events there. So she does all the coordinating with the booking and stuff there. And then I got, Chris runs the door when those things happen. And then also does customer service, and he also does the news on Fridays, so everyone kind of pitches in certain areas. But yeah, it's just, I'm very, very efficient, I guess. Like, I have a lot of really good systems and processes is a term that I've learned to really get in touch with, over the years, and I've just been sort of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't, I'm just like a musician and a graphic designer that kind of stumbled into this stuff. I never wanted to own a business at all. Like that was like my rebellion against my dad was a business owner, like I said, and I was always like, I'm never going to own a business. I'm just going to be in a band. And then I realized I guess I knew, I don't know. You just realize like how much help people need. And so you start doing stuff and then you realize like, I guess I should probably keep doing this, and that's how Hello started. Was my band we had multiple merch companies. We were just getting screwed so bad constantly, and we would sell a ton of merch. It was really like our lifeblood. And eventually we were just like, after we got dropped and we were doing all this other stuff, I was like, let's start a merch company too. Like we have a label, we have our own, let's just get our friend to pack orders while we're on tour. And when we come home, and we'll sign little notes, and like people will be pumped, and we'll take all of our own pictures of our products and write all of our own product descriptions, and it'll just be a better thing for people. And so I took that idea and ran with it, because so many of my friends and bands we'd go on tour with would just be like, who's doing your merch? We would be like outselling the headliners. And so that's how that came to be, is just, I wanted a place. I've been doing value for value with Hello Merch for 17 years. I don't make a penny until something sells. And that model works great, so I know it's going to kind of scale similarly to Wavlake, because I've just been following that model for so long.
I love it, man. We had the Blue Angels zipping by, so it's very loud. I think
Oh, nice.
Sam, we've covered a lot of ground, man. Excellent conversation. Anything that we didn't cover that you want to make sure, any shout outs, any last questions, thoughts, whatever?
No, I mean, thanks for having me. This is fun. I mean, sorry, I'm sure I rambled a lot, so I apologize. I always like to apologize for my my incoherent rambling. I tend to drift a little bit every once in a while, so I'm sorry to all the people out there if you're still awake. No, but check out, I guess all I want to say is, if you make music and you're listening to this, or if you have, friends, brother, your cousin, whatever, your friend makes music, these are the people that we're really trying to get on here now, is like people that are sort of into the idea of experimenting a little bit and don't really have anything to lose. Might be a little bit more forgiving when we're working on this stuff. It's really important that we have, like, without the artists that have uploaded their music now, it'd be very difficult to do what we're doing. So just want to shout out to everybody on Wavlake right now, because there's a ton of great music on there. Go check it out. And if you know anybody that makes music, just maybe see if they'll go give it a shot too, because it helps, and maybe they'll make some money too. And maybe it'll inspire them to make more. That's been another really cool thing that's happened, is people have just uploaded old projects and then been inspired to make new stuff just because of the interactions that have come out of it. So yeah.
I know I'm way overdue, but I've got some stuff to upload as well. So this is a good kick in the ass and reminder for me to do that. So
yeah, I can't wait to see that on there.
Yeah, swag. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. And until next time, go.